Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our Back to School Device Deployment Survival Guide webinar. My name is Matt Owensby. I'm joined here by Emily Staff of Incident IQ. Emily is a customer success manager here at Incident IQ. More importantly, Emily is a 14-year veteran in K-12 ed tech. Emily worked as a IT asset management specialist at Knox County Schools in Tennessee, district with 61,000 students, over 92 school locations. And through that time, Emily has become a seasoned veteran of many back-to-school device deployments. So we're going to cover tips and topics that every district should keep in mind before beginning those device rollouts. Emily, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead, jump in, and get started. So our first topic: communicate clear instructions and set expectations among staff for your deployment process. Shorter version, make a plan, and also make a backup plan. Emily, tell us a little bit about making the plan and the process for a deployment project of this size.
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is to think about all of the things that can go wrong. If we think about them beforehand and we can kind of mitigate those things, that's always good to have a plan, and then also a backup to that plan in case something goes wrong. One of the most important things, I think, is being in touch with administrators. We need to make sure that everybody is on the same page about what's happening on this day. We know that we have kids coming into the building, they're expecting devices, so let's make sure that we are prepared, we know what we're doing, and we communicate that with everybody involved in the plan for sure.
Absolutely. And one thing I'm curious about, how do you determine things like how many checkout lanes that you're going to have, or how many people that you need to have on staff? How are those determinations made?
Yeah, I think thinking about how many students we have coming in at a time. Are you going to have timed lines? Are you going to have a certain grade level at a certain day and a certain time? What kind of staff do you have that you can meet those needs? It all kind of depends on how many people you can have to help with the job. And think about that in comparison with how many students you have coming in at that same time.
Right, so kind of start with the amount of students that you're going to have at one time and kind of work backwards from there when you know kind of on average how many students you'll be serving at once.
Exactly.
So once you've put together your plan, you've got your blueprint in place, you've coordinated with district leadership at your deployment sites, it's time to put that plan into action. Our second tip talks about reducing student confusion through signage and directions. Marking your lane lines, making sure students know where to go. Tell us a little bit about some things to consider when you're building your kind of lines and your flow through your deployment site.
You need to be very specific about where you want kids to go. They're going to go wherever you don't want them. So, use chairs and tables to make paths and direct them in the flow that you want them to go. You can also adapt other processes, things that you already have in place, something like school picture day. That's something we do twice a year, every year in most school districts. So you can take something, an event that already works for you, and just adapt it for deployments.
Fantastic. No need to start from scratch, no need to reinvent the wheel. If you've got a process that works for other large events where you're cycling a lot of students in and out, take what works from that, adapt it for device deployment, good to go. Our third tip, we talk about handling paperwork and technology payments online before students get in line. What are some of the advantages of taking care of paperwork and payments even before students get into the building?
Well, I think the advantage is that you're spending the time doing the thing you want to do that day, which is getting devices in the hands of students.
Right, and it kind of cuts down on the complexity of the process, right? You don't have to have a table for AUP or your agreements to be signed. You don't have to have people stationed for payments or as many people if that is largely out of the way before deployment day starts, and you can kind of take those time savings, right, and maybe reinvest them into educational opportunities, teach the kids about powering on their device and best practices around device stewardship, and kind of, do you think that's an opportunity to kind of reduce the amount of red tape and signing of documents and focus that time on technology lessons and best practices instead?
Absolutely. I think it's always key to optimize on the time that we have with the kids that's not teaching time. So we know, if this is preschool time, that's time when it's not necessarily an educational time, but it doesn't mean that we still can't teach them about different things about how to care for their devices, best practices, and just kind of those reminders where don't put a water bottle in with your backpack, or, bananas and backpacks and Chromebooks don't mix well. Always take those teaching opportunities, and filling out that paperwork beforehand can definitely be key to that.
Right. And there's a lot of different tools that districts can use to manage online payments, online payment portals, and document and distribution tools as well to distribute and collect that paperwork. Now, Incident IQ just so happens to have tools for fees and fines as well as document distribution, but outside of us, there are a lot of solutions that exist to get all of that paperwork out of the way before deployment day. So let's move on to step 4, and this one's a little novel. It might not, not every district might be able to take advantage of it, but getting your tech-savvy students to help with device deployment. What are some ways that enthusiastic students, members of your school's middle school or high school tech team, how can students help with the deployment process?
I think one of the best ways is helping other students log into their device. That could be, older kids helping younger kids, students who may not know letters and numbers. It's hard to get them logged in sometimes. So having another helper with that can be a real time saver. So I think it doesn't also necessarily have to be handing out a device. There can be lots of ways that those students can be helpful during device deployment. Whether that is being a greeter, meeting people at the door, welcome to deployment, we're so happy you're here. It's pretty important, to be excited about technology and let them know that we're excited you're here and we're excited that we're going to give you a device today.
Absolutely. And, I think it's a great opportunity to, the student technology teams in schools are great opportunities for those, hard skills of tech support when you have students, diagnosing and fixing certain issues and acting as a kind of first line of defense and helping their peers, with tech support. But it also helps with those soft skills, right? This provides an opportunity to just be an expert and kind of lift up your peers and help them, get spun up with their new technology. So let's move on to our 5th tip, which is time your lines, right? Observe how long your students are waiting. And this is something that, can be useful if you have a multi-day deployment for kind of, day over day adjustments, and taking snapshots of the speed and efficiency of your deployment process. But it can also help year over year, right? And adjusting your deployment, for next year. So tell us a little bit about, what lessons you can learn and why timing your lines is important.
Well, from experience, I have found everybody comes at the beginning. So if you don't give them a specific time, you could have a line out the door and wrapped around the building. So being able to time your lines, how long is it taking? You could even use what I call like an amusement park style. You pick a kid, hand them a card, that's the time they walked in the door. When they hit the table, that's how long it takes them to get there. So it's an easy way to time how is this line moving. Quick and easy. It's also really good, from year to year. If you switch systems, it can be cumbersome in order to switch systems, but it can also bring advantages with quicker deployments, and collections and things like that. So you can look at it from year to year. Last year, how many devices did we deploy? How long did it take us? And compare that the next year and say, did we make improvements? What did we do better?
I love that too, right? That's a very it's very efficient, low-tech solution to gauge that time, right? Because when we were putting this guide together, I was like, oh, well, we had people say, well, we review security camera footage in the gym and observe a student and how long it takes them. And I was like, well, you could also use your stopwatch on your phone. But this, like you said, index card, right? Write the time, hand it to them, they hand it back, write the time, there you go. So a lot of ways you can accomplish this and a lot of valuable insights that you can glean from that. So, a student's gone through line, they've received their device. Our next tip is featuring a Genius Bar style area, right, where students can go for additional help, maybe once they've already received their device. Tell us a little bit about why it's important to have kind of an extra station for students who might need some additional help.
I think it's 2 words really, Matt. Password resets. Students, just like adults, never remember their passwords usually. So one of the most important things is to have a place where we can reset a password so that they can get logged in, and we're going to talk about this next, but so they can get logged in before they leave the building. We always want to make sure that they can utilize the device in a meaningful way, and they can't do that if they can't get logged in. And that always leads back to password resets.
Right. A pretty basic, but perpetual, never-ending responsibility of the IT team. Those password resets, right? And kind of, another thing that can help with is keeping those lines moving, right? Making sure that there's no bottleneck with somebody being like, was the password 1234? Was the password 12345? You can just keep the line moving, and anybody who needs extra assistance with issues like password reset can just scoot off to the Genius Bar, get their login issues resolved. So our next tip, step 7, is educating students on usage policies and device stewardship. What opportunities are there? What methods can you employ to drive home those essential district best practices and expectations and usage policies? How can you educate students on that while they are going through the deployment process?
I think there are so many unique and creative ways that you could do this. You could have some sort of a game on the floor that's like best practices. You could also have like a did you know kind of a thing, like did you know you shouldn't put your water bottle in your backpack, like those types of things. So you could also have other people that are kind of weaving in and out of the lines, just talking about these things as people are waiting, almost like an entertainment type thing, but with educational information about your Chromebooks. So I think that we hear all of the time so many cool things that people do during deployments. I think going to community and asking a question like that, what do you guys do during device deployment, could be really beneficial.
Absolutely. I think another, and maybe I'm just saying this because I was in the AV club in school, but if you have any students that are, budding filmmakers, content creators, you could have them put together, a quick little instructional video, right? Air it on the school news, your top 3 tips, or, PSA, make sure you sweep the keys before you close the lid, things like that. You can kind of, another opportunity to maybe bring, students in on that commercial teaching side of things. But I agree, there's a lot of really creative ways that you can get the message out, not only on deployment day, but in the weeks after as well. So let's talk, students got their device, they got their password reset, they know their usage policies, and they've been spun up on device stewardship. Our next tip is having students power up and log into their devices before they leave the deployment site. It might be common knowledge, but why is it important for students to kick the tires a little bit and take their device for a test drive before leaving the building?
Well, I think in our world today, teachers expect the kids to come in knowing how to use the device. I'm talking middle school and high school, not necessarily K1 and 2. That's definitely not an expectation in the world I came from. But, middle school and high, they're expected to know how to log in, how to get to their website, maybe even how to use their LMS, to get to their courses and find their online content. It's a big expectation. So we want to make sure that they really do know what they need to do before the first day of class so that we can get to educating and learning right away. And a big piece of that is to make sure you have enough chargers to power on devices. It's one of the things we always ran into, especially over summertime. Devices can lose power over the summer. If you don't put them in summer storage, you might not have a battery when you go to deploy. So always make sure you have enough chargers and enough power cords, extension cords, in order to make that happen.
Right. Additionally, yeah, the power cords and the extension cords, not only one per device, but maybe, a little auxiliary charging station, next, in your deployment flow. If a kid, gets a device, open it up, non-responsive, you've got a charger right there. You can give it some juice, kickstart that battery. Tip 9 goes a little bit back to that device stewardship piece we were talking about earlier, but creating login or desktop backgrounds that can serve as tech support cheat sheets. That way to kind of extend those device stewardship lessons from just day one to every day throughout the year. Tell us a little bit about ways that you can kind of leave these reminders for students throughout the year and what benefits that provides.
Yeah, for sure. I think no matter what type of device you're using, whether it's Chromebooks or iPads, you have a management system. And so within that management system, you can push those things like backgrounds. You could also push information such as, if you have a question, call the help desk at, put in your ticket here at this link. Through Google Admin, you can also push bookmarks to devices so that kids have access to your school website, your ticketing platform, their learning management system. Those bookmarks can all be pushed through Google Admin, and you can also push those through an MDM like Jamf or Mosel. So that's also something that you could do beforehand for ease of use on your devices.
Fantastic. And this is just my own personal question, but do students typically have the ability to change their desktop background? Is that a permission that most schools allow students to do, or do you typically keep that locked down?
I think that is definitely a district and a school decision. So some schools allow that and others don't. A lot of times they'll use it as an identification feature. So if the device is at the middle school, it has a middle school background with their mascot. If it is an elementary school, and maybe you have multiples that all have different mascots. They have different ones, and then when you can open it and quickly identify this device belongs at this particular school.
I see. Okay, cool. And another thing we discussed, right, is maybe creating and using your MDM, your Jamfs, your Mosels, your Google Admin consoles to maybe create a couple of different flavors for different roles, right? Your young learners might need different resources than your older learners, might need different resources than your teachers, for example. So, consider creating some different backgrounds for some different roles, and if you using something like as an IQ, or you've got good device data, right? You can take those OU paths and you can push your teacher desktop to your teachers and your high school desktop to your high schoolers, right?
Absolutely. And you can also do things like websites based on those roles as well. So these particular roles have access to these sites, and these sites over here are blacklisted.
Got it. So we've got our devices into student hands. Classes are about to begin. We're painting a perfect world here. Everybody knows how to use their device. Everybody remembers their password. Everybody's taken their water bottle from their backpack, their 3-day-old banana from their backpack. They put it safely in a Ziploc bag, in their lunchbox. Everybody's ready to go. Conducting a post-deployment wrap-up, our 10th step. Why is conducting a post-deployment wrap-up important? What should you talk about and who should be involved?
Well, I think it's always important to get feedback from the people who actually do the job to see, how do you feel about this? Do you feel like we were successful? What are those things that you think we could do better? What are the things that we did really good? It's always good to focus on the good things as well as, think about the things we could change in the future to make it better the next time. So I think involving those people that were involved in the actual device deployment is always important. And maybe you take a survey of parents and students as well and ask them, what do you think went really well with device deployment? What do you think we could do better next time? We could get some really great feedback from parents and students as well. Maybe they want to learn something that you may not have even thought about along the way. So getting feedback, from all parties involved can be really beneficial.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of different ways to pull off a device deployment like this, and especially here at Instant IQ, I started here pre-COVID, and a lot of districts did it one way. Then post-COVID, right, or during COVID, and a lot of districts were doing drive-through style, minimum contact style deployments. Now schools are open again, and we hear about big deployments in gyms, or you can do it individually by classroom and pre-assign the devices. There's a lot of different ways to solve for this issue and to make sure that your district has a successful and minimally stressful deployment. Are there any other tips? Anything else you would like to add before we wrap up?
I think just be flexible, kind of test things out, do what works for you, because it's not going to be the same for every district. And sometimes not every school is going to deploy the same way, even inside of the same district. So, a lot of those are decisions based on admin, when the kids are coming in, what type of staff do we have. There are a lot of factors that go into it. So just make sure that you kind of take all of those things into consideration and make decisions that work for you guys.
Right, and that is just great advice, across a lot of things in life. Just be flexible. So with that in mind, thank you so much, Emily, for joining us. We have a live Q&A starting here in a couple of seconds, so we will be right back to answer your questions. All right, so good afternoon, everybody. Jason, if you could close that video for me and stop sharing that, we'll jump into this Q&A. Emily, can you hear me all right? Fantastic. I don't know if I can hear you. Check
How about now?
your... I sure can. Yes, absolutely.
I was
All right.
muted.
Well, Emily did a better job than me maintaining continuity today. You would never know that we were pre-recorded if I didn't come in wearing a completely different shirt and with a ponytail this time. So hello, everybody. Thank you for joining our webinar today. If you've got any questions, go ahead and drop those into the questions section on your GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll get those answered. Our first question is about students who can't come to your deployment days. How do you deal with students who don't have a device on the first day of school, once school's already started, if they weren't able to attend those handouts?
I think the same tip, number one, applies. Have a plan and a backup plan for that. So, that could be something like having your library media specialist set up with devices that were not deployed originally. It could also be having your, front end secretary and receptionist able to deploy devices to students. So it just kind of depends, again, on what works for you in your district and individual schools, but have a plan in place because you know not every kid is going to show up with their device on the first day. We have a lot of transient students sometimes, and so maybe they don't even know where they're going to be starting school this year. So it's always good just to keep in mind, they're also going to be stressed about getting a device. So have a plan in place and make sure it's as easy as possible for the kids to find out where they're supposed to go. The worst thing is having confusion about, I don't know where I'm supposed to go to get my device. So just make sure that you have a plan and you've communicated that plan clearly on the first day of school.
Got it. So talking about students who don't have devices on the first day, transient students who forgot their devices, kind of brings up a little bit of a question about spare devices and, outfitting all of your instructional sites with enough spare devices to accommodate kids who do not have their device on a given day. How do you, as an IT team, make those decisions about allotting spares throughout a district?
Well, that is a very large question, but the easy answer is that we have good data. So if we have good data that we've collected, from previous years, and we know, what's our student enrollment, what does our spare count look like, we can then kind of distribute those spares across different locations within the district. So, really for me, it's all about good data so that we can make good decisions. That leads to, we have the spares we need, or we can shift them around if needed.
Mm-hmm. So making those data-driven decisions around enrollment, knowing how many kids are where, how many spares you might have needed in previous years to inform that.
Yeah, and that also kind of ties back to another kind of article things that we've been posting recently about audits. So the summertime is a great time to do device audits. You're already doing repairs on devices and things like that. So it's a great time to confirm, do we have enough devices for the upcoming year? So, really it's a very cyclical thing that we do in education, and so we just have to be very intentional about these are the things we need to achieve at this particular time of year so that we're ready for the next stage of the process. And it's just an ongoing cycle.
Right. The seasonality of the K-12 school year, making sure that all those projects are taken care of at the right time, so it kind of feeds one into the other. Your summer projects inform your back to school, so on and so forth. We talked a lot today about, things that IT teams should do, things that support teams should do for back to school deployment. What should IT teams and support teams avoid during these back to school deployment?
Panic. You should avoid panic. You know what I mean? Just like we talked about being flexible, I think it's also just really important to kind of take a step back, take a nice deep breath, because this is a very stressful time of the year, not only for technology, but just people in general. You have maybe kids going back to school, you have kids that have never attended school that are now starting. You have teachers that could be new to the district and a lot of anxiety that surrounds that. So I think just kind of taking a big step back and looking big picture, taking a nice deep breath and saying, this is all going to be okay. As long as, we all kind of work together and do what we're supposed to do, it's all going to be okay. So I think don't panic is my best piece of advice.
That is a good piece of advice. It's one I will take to heart in my occupation as well. But right, because we know that on deployment days, right, your other support requests don't cease, right? And there's only so many hours in a day, and there's only so many things that you can tackle. So
those tickets, they'll still be there the next day. You know what I mean? They don't magically close themselves overnight, so they'll still be there.
Right. Any other questions from our audience? I'll give it a couple more seconds, but talking about not panicking, right? And those tickets being there, that will be there the next day. That kind of feeds into a topic we're going to be covering in the coming weeks and in our next webinar, which I haven't told you about yet, Emily, which we're going to be covering, dealing with the influx of support tickets that come at the beginning of a school year, because we see on our side at Incident IQ, we see that spike every August and September, and it's just almost a vertical climb of support tickets. So that will be our next webinar. Look out in your inbox for an invitation to that as well. We'll be having that. I got to check my calendar, but late August, I believe. But if there are no more questions from the audience, going once, going twice, pausing for dramatic effect. All right. Well, we are going to wrap things up here. Thank you so much for attending today. We'll send you a recording in your inbox if you'd like to share it with your team or watch it, again on 2x speed. So you have to listen to me mumble less, then you are free to do that. But from all of us here at Incident IQ, we wish you the best of luck on your back to school device deployments at the beginning of the year. You can reach out to us if you'd like to learn more about the platform that Incident IQ provides K-12 support teams, and we look forward to seeing you next time. So thank you everybody for attending. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.